Previous one, I believe every other person in the room heard the Beatles singing in their head, "When I get older, losing my hair." Well, I already lost, not many years from now. Well, let's have another Valentine then. Central and Eastern Europe in transition, demographics and socio-economic implications, difficult word, for the EU. Easy word. So let's look into the neighborhood policies, enlargement policies, possible future development of those in the context of what we know about the current political, economic, but also security situation in Europe. Let this be a useful platform for discussion. Let's put together what the academics, politicians, policymakers, and civil society know. We, in Poland, accessed the EU in 2004. That's 21 years ago, so people who were born there can vote now, imagine. And there are currently 9 countries in the pipeline in the Western Balkans, plus Ukraine, while the European Neighbourhood Policy governs EU's cooperation with 6 East European states. Well, Russia's full-scale aggression has shown that the EU's neighbourhood and enlargement policies can perhaps also serve as a geopolitical and security tools, at least deterrence. Is there anything more important than that? Well, if you go outside and see the whiteboard with one of the projects run by the University of Warsaw, you'll see the question what resilience means. The first answer was financial security. Security as such came next, and that definitely means something. Let's dig now into the brains of the distinguished members of panel 3. We will have the pleasure of listening to introduction by Marta Jaroszewicz, University of Warsaw, with Chair Alicja Curanović, University of Warsaw, and speakers Henryka Mościcka-Dendys, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, of the Republic of Poland, Wasyl Bodnar, His Excellency is Ambassador of Ukraine to Poland, Jolanta Szymańska, Polish Institute of International Affairs, Laure Delcour, La Sorbonne University, and Alar Streimann University of Tartu. And of course, the floor belongs to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted that you decided to spend your Wednesday evening with us. I assure it was the right choice. As you see, we've gathered top experts on the issues we are going to talk about today. We have practitioners, scholars, representatives of think tanks, so really the most competent people to address the most important issues. And the focus of this panel is neighborhood and enlargement policy of the EU. And in the panel before, our Estonian colleague said that, well, we are almost here in a competition mode for what's the biggest threat, migration or aging, and I think the war beats it all. And unfortunately, right, I mean, since 2022, the war has become the part of every discussion about EU enlargement and its neighborhood policies. And the last thing I want to say, I will try to keep my moderating really minimalist so we could have Q&A with you because your questions and comments are really valuable. So finishing at this, I will pass now the mic to a colleague of mine, Marta Jaroszewicz, who will give us a short introduction on the most recent dynamics when it comes to EU enlargement and neighborhood policy. Please, Marta, the floor is yours.
Hello. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies, ministers, professors, directors, colleagues. It's my pleasure to welcome you also on behalf of organizers to this session. It's a little bit tricky title because it's more really policy oriented, but it's called Central and Eastern Europe in Transition, Demographic and Socio-Economic Implications for the EU. We are honored, as Alicja mentioned, to have 5 distinguished guests and excellent moderator. So my task is to provide you with very short, brief, informative introduction where we currently stand regarding the political process in Central and Eastern Europe in the context of EU enlargement and neighborhood policies. Indeed, I think this is really a fascinating social and political process, but it's often somehow hidden from the mainstream public debate that we would like to change, but that could really become a strong impetus for the social and economic development as well as promotion of peace in Europe. Let me move to the first slide. So very quickly, I think it was already said, what we are going to discuss today is examine the current state of the EU's neighborhood and enlargement policies and their possible future developments in light of the political, economic, and security situation in Europe and beyond. So there are currently 9 recognized candidate countries, including the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, while the European neighborhood policy governs the EU cooperation with 5, but previously 6, because Belarus withdrew for now from the Eastern Partnership initiative, and Kosovo is considered a potential candidate. So we may say that we've got like 10 countries that would like to be to become members of the EU. 6 candidates are currently engaged in active negotiations, with the Western Balkan countries being like the older ones and the most advanced, while Ukraine, Moldova having newly started in 2024 their accession negotiations. Western Balkans partners follow a unique enlargement process called the stabilization and association process, so it's a little bit regional process, while Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova in the past were formally referred to as accession trio, but because also of the situation in Georgia, I think it's now more like a bilateral accession formats that are taking place. So very quick background, who can join the EU? Any European country can join if meets the membership criteria, also known as the Copenhagen criteria. I know that I am saying the basis, but there is also discussion of going, whether the Copenhagen criteria are really, the ones and so on. That's why I'm giving you the basic as well. So how the accession looks like. So it includes so-called screening and then opening, closing of the negotiation chapters, which are currently, according to the 2022 accession framework, are grouped under 6 clusters. Of course, apart from the accession, there is whole framework of different institutional, financial, reform-oriented formats. So there are other regional formats like among Western Balkans countries, free trade area, CEFTA, that links to other regions and formats. For instance, recently, just 2 days ago, European Union adopted Black Sea region strategy that also clearly shows its interest in Central Asia and connection between European neighborhood policy and other regions. The process in the terms of Commission, under new Commission, now the process is overseen by the Directorate General for Enlargement and Eastern Neighborhood. And maybe the final slide about literature review very quickly. So what the political science and other international relations scholars are writing about enlargement and neighborhood policy. So generally it is rather clear. I mean, like all the literature new and old is showing that previous enlargements have been among the EU most significant successes, also in terms of stability, peace, convergence, economic indicators, and so on. When it comes to the new enlargement, since already mid-2010s, scholars have highlighted the growing geopolitical role of the EU in the region, beyond its traditional image as normative power. I think we'll be discussing in detail, right, this tension between modernization and normative power and geopolitical role. But it's already the process that makes, that causes certain policy convergence, as in Eastern Partnership countries, for instance, by using different tools of those policies. And maybe final comment that, of course, Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine has demonstrated that EU's neighborhood and enlargement policies can serve as like one of the most important symbolic geopolitical and security tool of the EU policy. But the question, I think I will leave you with this question, whether driven by geopolitical forces, whether it may stay for longer as such, because usually it should be also accompanied by economic integration, interest, and routine bureaucratic procedures. And yeah, the final context that is that there is also like huge migration on mobility element in future EU. Accession because of the functioning of temporary protection, for instance, for Ukrainian nationals who already have residence rights in the EU. And I think, thank you very much. I will leave you, here.
Thank you so much. It really sets the stage for our discussion, and we turn now to our panelists. We'll proceed now in a following manner. So we'll have a first round, which is organized among two general questions. One is about the risks and opportunities that the new situation, post-2022, created for the EU as such and its member states when it comes to enlargement, right? And the other part, so what are the security challenges, opportunities, and issues which are faced by the candidate countries, either from Eastern Europe or from the Southern Europe, right? So keeping this in mind, I ask our panelists to address these one or both questions, and I think it's good if we start, we stick to the order foreseen in our program. So, if I'm not mistaken, the first should be Minister Henryka Mościcka-Dendys. Please, the floor is yours. Up to 10 minutes, if it's possible, and I will kindly remind you when you have the last minute, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for having me here. I'll try to be very brief and concise. I understand we should spare some time for a discussion because only then it gets interesting. And we'll try to entertain you because I understand it's the last panel and some of you might be already a bit tired. So my main argument for today will be that enlargement, actually the enlargement policy is the EU's most successful public policy. When you look at the results of enlargement policies, it has constantly enlarged for the last several decades the sphere of, or the area of peace, prosperity, security and stability in Europe. And it further has the potential to do so. Therefore, Poland is a staunch proponent of a further enlargement towards the east, be it with Ukraine, our direct neighbor, be it with Moldova, who is the other candidate country in the east, be it in the Western Balkans, where the enlargement process clearly is uncompleted, and there are countries who are knocking on EU's doors for years, for decades, some of them already. When you look at the example of the last big enlargement, the one in 2004, when Poland joined together with our neighbors in the Baltic region, with Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, but also with the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, and you look at the transformation 20 years into the process of our countries. When you look at the streets of Warsaw, where we just reside at the moment, you see how successful this policy is and how powerful the EU's enlargement potential is. When our country has been completely transformed within the last 20 years. When you look at economic data, it's just obvious. We started at 40% of GDP per capita of the EU's average back then. We are now over 72, and Warsaw is at the standards of Luxembourg. So it's quite a successful transformation and our opportunity well used. When addressing the so-called frugal states in Western Europe, whether I speak to the Danes or to the Dutch or to the French, I always would say that we have invested your money well here. It's really visible how much this country has been changed. Poland is holding its 6 months EU Council presidency, and you know that we put the presidency under the motto of security. And enlargement is one of those security-connected aspects. Because, as I said before, we regard the enlargement policy as a very powerful instrument also when it comes to enlarging the sphere of security. Mentioning Ukraine, just as one example, you see that the Ukrainians have been fighting since the very beginning of the war a decade ago under the European flag. And European values have been, let's say, one of the headlines when it comes to the aspirations of the Ukrainian nations. And we believe that the European project is not completed until everyone who really has the right and wants to join is not within the European, or finds itself within the European borders. One point which is often mentioned when it comes to enlargement in the public discussions between analysts, between political actors in the European Union is a contradiction, or a supposed contradiction, between enlargement and the internal reform or treaty reform of the European Union. To be very blunt with you, I mean, obviously Poland's government is of the opinion that there is no contradiction, and we should not see or not create a tension between these two. 2004 has clearly shown that the enlargement process can serve an improvement of the working methods of the European Union, and we believe that the enlargement policy still has the potential. If we want to reform the decision-making processes in the EU, this can go hand in hand with a further enlargement process. Obviously, the enlargement process has to be merit-based, so each of the 9 candidate countries has to go in its own way and has to do its own homework. I think they all do, and we see into that. Poland, also to come back to the presidency aspect, Poland has the intention to open at least the first negotiation cluster with Ukraine and with Moldova, and we still hope to be able to do so before the end of June. We try to convince our Hungarian friends that this is the right way to go, because I think everyone else is actually on the converted side. For the other candidate countries, we see a good progress. We hope to finalize, for example, and finally close negotiations with Montenegro on Chapter 31, which needs a green light from Croatia, but which would also be an important step in the negotiation process. We have held 2 quite successful intergovernmental conferences with Albania. There is some progress with, though limited and modest, with Serbia. So we think the policy is on track. It requires a new momentum, which the new European Commission, in the new institutional cycle, which started by the end of last year, has given to the enlargement policy. And from the Polish perspective, we very much support this, let's say, idea of enlarging the European project. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. A lot of food for thought, definitely. And the next person who I pass the mic is Ambassador Wasyl Bodnar. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Minister, dear colleagues. Thank you for invitation. It's a really essential topic for Ukrainian future. And we all should talk about the benefits and challenges, and they are both sides. It's as black and white. They exist, both of them. We believe in Ukraine that EU in this turmoil time was very active and responsible for the situation in which we are today. So when the war started, it was not NATO but EU who responded adequately, who opened up the doors for Ukraine, who actually adopted the decision regarding the Ukrainian candidacy, and it was a very strong booster for Ukraine, maybe the same level as Polish tanks, which arrived in the first months of war and helped Ukraine to withstand the military attacks of Russia on Kiev and other regions. So Poland was and is in the spearhead of the support of Ukraine to the on the way to the EU, and we are really grateful for all the consistent support we have now during the EU presidency. We have the already special team visiting Ukraine, helping Ukrainian negotiators to be prepared for the talks. We have all our ministers practically have been in Warsaw during this period of time, and in the unofficial meetings, communicating with the European partners and resolving the practical issues. So Poland was a very responsible presidency, make a very responsible presidency, and it was, let's say, very pro-Ukrainian despite of existing problems. Really, for us, there are a lot of opportunities we could talk about, and also what the challenges we could face. So I'm not saying what the EU could face, because the EU could say by itself. So from our perspective, the first, what Ukraine could bring to the EU. First of all, it's we are today the security wall for European Union. Welfare should be protected, and Ukraine took this challenge and fight for our own future, fight for our own values, but also for Europe as well. And let's not underestimate this story, because today it's because of the 4th year of full-scale invasion and the 11th year of war, little bit this topic diminished by natural problems inside the countries, and everybody's paying particular attention to their own problems and issues. Secondly, the war forced us to be very innovative, to create a lot of new solutions, starting from the civil dimensions like IT, artificial intelligence, many other software solutions which are very essential for the future of the EU, but also with the hardware, starting from drones and different military equipment, which, as well as experience in the security, experience in the defense, experience in this IT sector, which we could easily share, not only by words, but also by deeds. So our companies are already applying for different joint projects together with the EU companies or in the EU countries for establishing their branches for co-production and for sharing of different opinions and experiences, which are really essential for the security, but also for the security in the civil dimension, like the local authorities, how they behave, what they should update, and how to organize the population against possible threats. So, secondly, actually, we are the big and strong country in the terms of resources, of different added value which could bring here to the market. Yes, it's the other side is competitiveness, but here we have, for example, the agriculture dimension, which was very burning in the terms of 2023-24, when the border was blocked, when there were a lot of accusations that Ukraine will flood European markets with their products. So I would say honestly that today's cooperation between Ministry of Agriculture and associations of agriculture producers is a good example how to resolve the issues. Yes, a lot of myths and stereotypes have been demolished by the direct communication. There are some areas where the competition really need to be tackled, and we work on that. And some areas there are some agreements and some quotas on different issues, which and what the method should be used for resolution of the problems. Because if we are only criticizing each other using media, we will not find a solution. And that's the way how we should also speak with Brussels. Because a lot of norms and standards which have been established for the agriculture producers here, maybe I would say not everyone is happy here, and they all, I mean, the producers are also ready to renegotiate these terms and norms which are really actual in the EU. So the other dimension is also about the energy. Now before the war, we constructed a lot of lines of supplies with different countries, including with Poland, to supply our electricity, because we have been producing too much for us, but now we are importing. But having the grids, having the lines of supplies, we could do it to two sides. We have the nuclear or atom energy, which is very productive. We have very strongly developing green energy. We have a lot of companies also from Poland who are investing in this green energy with different wind, solar, and other solutions. And the next generation hydrogen is also on the it's the topic of future, but before the war, there were already practical discussions what investments are necessary and how to solve the issue of future energy solutions. So infrastructure, I don't believe that we will fight forever. So we will need to work together for different other regions, which are a natural line of interest for both Europe and Ukraine today, but I believe we will be in the common basket in one European home. So we will need to have a strong infrastructure, both inter-sea, like the Three Seas Initiative and developing stronger, or to Caucasus, to Turkey, to Central Asia. And Ukraine has a lot of solutions, starting from the ports and port infrastructure now being re-established, or we are working closely to engage foreign investments into the reconstruction of this port infrastructure, including the railways. I believe a lot of possibilities are opening for the restoration of the flights. And we also have a dream that the first flight should be maybe from Warsaw. Like Laure is pretending to be one of the companies who will restore their flights to Ukraine. So there are a lot of prospects in this dimension, plus reconstruction. What with that or not, but it will be a big construction market. It will be, but not only in the terms of bridges and roads. It will be a story of transformation of Ukraine in the modern European state, as Poland has done. So the experience of Poland is very unique, very fresh, and very necessary for Ukraine today. Despite of all odds, but I was here 15 years ago as a young diplomat. And today I came as an ambassador, so it's a completely different country from the infrastructure perspective. And so you wisely use the benefits which EU propose and implement the projects which are visible and create a lot of more opportunities. And we're even now thinking about the extending of for example, railway connections with some industrial areas which are necessary for the reconstruction of Ukraine, or creating some hubs, which some of them already are working. We're not loud about that. So still it's endless. So please stop me, because I will not. I'll find another. So just look at these perspectives from the different angles, but also we should talk about the challenges or the threats which we face here. So first and the most necessary story is about the unity. Still, EU and EU decision-making process, it's still have some, let's say, floors for improvement. Because today we face that one country is blocking our way to the EU and the clusters are not open, which were scheduled even 3. We have the ambition to open 3 of them. It is still in a discussion. So another thing is about let's not forget about Russia. Because the visibility of restoration of peace in Ukraine and attempts of some business circles to restart working with Russia and to make business as usual, it's a big temptation. And it's a big threat. Once again, energy supplies, different business projects. So it will lead to forget about the threat, which does not disappear. So the Russian threat will exist up until this aggressive regime will continue to wage wars and threaten the countries. Up until the beginning of full-scale invasion to Ukraine, let's recall what the percentage of Russian gas was or oil was on the European market. It still possesses some influences, but then it goes to the influence in the political dimension, it goes to different other areas. It's the second one, and the third, it's about the vision for the future. Would we like to be strong, I mean, as Europe? I'm maybe over-exaggerating my competences, but nevertheless, if we are talking as Europe, are we strong enough to compete with other parts of the world, with the United States, with China, cooperate and compete? I'm finishing it. So that's good that someone is controlling me. That's good. So let's think about that, because the vision of future is the most important maybe for the development of the EU, because there are some forces who are looking at this perspective very skeptically. So we should be prepared for that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then let's move to Jolanta Szymańska. Let's hear what the think tanks think about it.
Thank you very much. I'm the head of European Union program at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, so I think I will present somehow more intra-EU perspective on enlargement. First, I want to refer to what Minister Mościcka-Dendys mentioned, the potential of enlargement and the success story of enlargement. My impression is that during the last years, European Union was not so super serious when it comes to enlargement. And when we talk about enlargement, mainly we think about the crisis of enlargement, because what we observe is a kind of stalemate in the process, because the last country that joined the European Union, Croatia, joined in 2013, so very long time ago, and since then we could observe the accession process of the United Kingdom, not necessarily the accession of new members. And the impression may be that we are simply not very serious when we speak about enlargement, although most of the countries usually mention enlargement as a priority. But when it comes to details, we can see that this policy faces various challenges in both of directions of this enlargement, both in Balkans, Western Balkans, and in the Eastern neighborhood. After solving the Macedonian-Greek dispute in early 2019, France and Bulgaria blocked the enlargement process during the previous term of the European Commission regarding Albania and North Macedonia. Such actions by member states have become, alongside the lack of political will and the spread of non-democratic standards in some countries, for example, in Serbia, as well as the slow pace of reforms, for example, in Montenegro, a persistent challenge reinforcing the crisis of enlargement in the Balkans. And reforming process of the enlargement policy, primarily thanks to the new methodology adopted in 2020, doesn't translate into a strategic acceleration of enlargement process. 2022, the Russia full-scale invasion of Ukraine has changed the geography of the process, because we started to think about Eastern countries. But what we could observe then was a kind of competition between Balkan states and Eastern partners, mainly Ukraine, and the fear that suddenly European Union countries will use double standards when it comes to the enlargement process, treating Eastern neighborhood as a strategic necessity, but Western Balkans as a merit-based process. Currently, in the European Union, I observe a little bit of a changing mood when it comes to enlargement, in particularly some member states. I think France can be a quite good example, because France was in a history rather country blocking the enlargement, maybe not directly, but sometimes using others to block it. Or using the blockades of the others to actually to see and wait what can happen. Anyway, I think that now in France there is a stronger and stronger feeling that enlargement becomes a really a security necessity. So this is a very positive sign. Still, I think that in the next years, only two countries can think about real prospect of accession. First, Montenegro. I mean, their target date is 2028, and Albania 2030. It's still very positive and optimistic prognosis, I would say, because we still face a lot of challenges inside the European Union also that need to be taken into account, as we have very complicated process of ratification of potential accession treaty in some member states. But having all these barriers, potential barriers in mind, we should do everything to prepare ourselves. And I think, and what I'm waiting for is the publication of the next generation, next MFF during the summer in July, because the new financial framework will show us how much we are going to pay for preparation process for the accession. And this is the first step, the first essential step that need to be done. The next very important element that we should take into consideration in the EU is the communication with our society about enlargement, because I agree that Big Bang enlargement was the success story. But I think still, talking about enlargement, we present it mainly as a project beneficent for the candidate states. We forget about this other aspect. We forget to show how Big Bang enlargement, for example, changed the European Union economy, how it contributed to the economies of particular older member states. And this is essential to address all the fears, social fears that we can see in many member states. I can see all these fears even during the voting about prolonging temporary protection directive. This is actually the very up-to-date topic now, because Commission wants us to prolong this protection again, and in some member states it's a very controversial topic. So I think that the very frank communication with European societies about the benefits of enlargement is also important, because my impression is that we mainly think and talk about the fears of society, about potential problems, about challenges related to the enlargement, especially in Poland, I think, with regard to Ukraine, because Ukraine is also a very big market, so it's a competitor. We should talk more about challenges, about opportunities, sorry, and try to convince our societies, because I and my colleagues, we organize trainingships for Ukrainian officials, actually, for an accession process. And here I need to stress that you mentioned our fresh experience 20 years ago. It's really difficult to say that we have fresh experience. It's completely different union and a completely different process now, but we still try to share our knowledge with Ukrainian colleagues about enlargement. And I see huge determination on the Ukrainian side. And I think that Ukrainian officials are they are usually very young people, really well prepared for the accession. But they need also supporters inside the European Union and to make this process successful. So, yeah, I think you should also search for partners here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now let's move to Professor Delcour. What's how you approach these two questions?
Thank you very much for inviting me today. I will echo what has been said earlier on enlargement being one of the most successful EU policies. However, I will also argue that this policy needs to be tailored to the current context, which is defined by sheer geopolitical volatility and also sheer democratic uncertainty. So very briefly, I will touch upon the challenges facing the EU because these have been perfectly summarized. The first one being probably credibility, meaning that the EU needs no longer to promise, but also to deliver on its promises. It took about 70 years to North Macedonia to move from the candidate status to the opening of negotiations, which is a very long time. Second challenge is unity, as Mr. Ambassador just reminded us. And the third one is indeed preparedness, not only in institutional terms, meaning that probably further internal EU reforms are needed to make new waves of enlargement effective, but also societal awareness about the process, about the countries that are joining the EU. So raising the understanding among EU citizens will be critical for the effectiveness of the next waves of enlargement. Now, I would argue that the current context does not just offer challenges, but also opportunities to the EU. And the first one is the predominant understanding of enlargement as a geopolitical imperative. And this is clearly an important development. You mentioned, the previous speaker mentioned French U-turn. Well, I have witnessed, I'm from France, so I have witnessed how French policy on enlargement has shifted since Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Enlargement was previously perceived with some reluctance because in the French perception, enlargement came at the cost or at the expense of deepening EU integration. And this is no longer the case. Enlargement is now regarded as a geopolitical necessity and as a key instrument for ensuring European security. So this understanding has become widely shared within the European Union, and it is undoubtedly an opportunity for the future rounds of enlargement. And then the second opportunity, in my view, is the persisting transformative power of the European Union in Eastern Europe and the South Caucasus, meaning that the EU retains attraction power not only in candidate countries, but also beyond, in neighboring countries. And one illustration of this is the fact that a few months ago, the Armenian parliament adopted a bill in favor of joining the EU. And we're talking about a country that was, like 2 years ago, a member of the Russian-driven Collective Security Treaty Organization, and is still on paper, but only on paper. So enlargement and deeper ties with neighboring countries can indeed serve as a catalyst for reforms. Now, turning to the partner countries themselves and the key challenges facing them, I will not focus on Ukraine because Mr. Ambassador already addressed Ukraine, but I will focus on Moldova and the South Caucasus countries. The first challenge, in my view, and perhaps the core challenge, is democratization and the rule of law. These are essential preconditions for both EU accession, but also long-term stability of the EU's neighborhood. And yet, this is where the paths are currently diverging. We are seeing important progress being achieved in Moldova, whether in terms of judicial reform, in terms of tackling corruption. We are seeing also persisting democratic opening in Armenia, despite sheer geopolitical vulnerability. However, these achievements are highly fragile, not least because both countries are highly vulnerable to security threats, especially from Russia. And then we have the case of a candidate country that has not only democratically backslided, but that is experiencing a real authoritarian shift. I'm having Georgia in mind, so we can no longer talk about democratic backsliding here. What we are witnessing is an unprecedented pace of autocratization. It took Putin or Lukashenko several years or decades to turn their countries into autocracy. It took the Georgian Dream government only a few months to turn Georgia into a real autocracy. So the only hope now is in Georgian societal resistance with EU support. Turning to another challenge, security, which is in fact closely connected to democratization, all countries in the region face direct or indirect threats through military occupation, also hybrid warfare, or economic coercion. Moldova in particular is confronted with persistent disinformation from Russia, but also destabilization attempts via oligarchic networks. Armenia is experiencing deep insecurity caused by Azerbaijan aggressive stance, but it is perhaps, again, Georgia's example that offers the best illustration of the connections between democracy and security, or lack thereof. It is no coincidence, again, if the Georgian Dream government used insecurity as a cover for the autocratic shift, in particular to this narrative of not opening a second front in Georgia. So my key point here is that democracy and security are critically interwoven and connected in the border countries, and a key task for the EU is to address both of them simultaneously and respond to the conditions on the ground both flexibly and strategically. So to what extent can EU enlargement offer solutions? In fact, EU accession is no panacea. It cannot solve every problem. It cannot substitute for domestic political agency. It cannot per se resolve long-standing conflicts. However, it can be a very powerful framework for transformation, not just alignment of institutions, not just alignment of legislation, but also genuine societal support for democratization and reforms. So EU enlargement and the renewed neighborhood policy need to go beyond technical conditionality and in fact speak to identity, speak to belonging, and speak about shared futures. So to conclude, we found ourselves at a crossroads, and both the ENP and the enlargement process have become first order of what the EU is, what it aspires to be, and the EU must now rethink, reinvent both enlargement and neighborhood policies as living instruments of democracy and security. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think it's the third time during this panel when we hear that the future is at stake every time when we think about enlargement EU policy, right? How much is at stake there? Last but not least there, Ambassador Alar Streimann, what's your take on these two questions?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the organizers. It's been really a very interesting debate today, so it's difficult to choose the angle of attack, what to add to so many good and very valuable ideas. Perhaps I should say a couple of words on myself, even if I'm representing University of Tartu. My background is in the Estonian Foreign Service since 34 years, almost from the very beginning. And perhaps in today's context, it's relevant that I was leading the Estonian accession negotiations for 7 years in 1997 to 2003. And I was a colleague of Polish friends Jan Kolakowski and Mr. Truszyński. So I have very fond memories of these days, but of course that was mentally so stressful that once we had become the members and then signed the treaty in Athens, I really put my pen on the table and I thought that never again, no more EU issues. And that brings me to my second remark is that until last year, when I was invited to represent Estonia in something which is a Nordic-Baltic high-level advisory group for Ukrainian EU accession. And that's put together by eight governments, 3 Baltic governments and 5 Nordic governments to help the Ukrainian friends and colleagues with the accession process and negotiations. We have a very diverse mix of every country is represented by 1 or 2 experts. I'm the former chief negotiator, there are former commissioners, so it's a very diverse group. So we really cover a very broad agenda of know-how. And the main purpose is to be there for the Ukrainian friends, to ask difficult questions, perhaps even sometimes stupid questions, whatever, just to be there available as a switchboard day and night. And we have been really trying to help with screening process and now preparation with position papers. So it's a very close, even daily but weekly based cooperation. And now I hear Poland is joining us perhaps in a way of doing the same thing. So, and that brings me to the issue at hand, the enlargement. Well, obviously, much positive has been said. You could really take it from different angles. It's quite clear that even if the Russian aggression is a tragedy for everybody, even for the world, I would say it's a global issue. It's no longer a regional European issue. If there is something positive, then probably without this aggression, Ukraine would not have been today at the accession negotiations. The same goes for Moldova. The way both countries have to go is a very long way. I don't mean to get into the debate about the dates and target dates or whatever, but that's a specific issue. We can touch upon that. It's simply a very complex process, and our Ukrainian friends understand it very well now. It's perhaps, if you go into the regions, it's more difficult, but it's normal. You start from very low. We had the same thing in my country. But perhaps for the so-called older European states, it's more difficult to imagine because France, Germany were the establishing countries, Benelux. They have perhaps not really gone through ever this kind of accession process from zero. Only East Germany did something comparable overnight. That's the fast accession, the only spectacular fast accession event, if you want to use it ever in your discussions. But otherwise, we all have gone through this reform process, lots of difficult decisions, immensely difficult investment process, takes time because you don't have the money. And most probably the only source you get this money is from the EU, just to help with the pre-accession programs. And the EU is already providing a lot today. So I was very happy that this window of opportunity opened itself. I strongly believe that the whole Europe will win from this accession process. But yes, we all have to make efforts to go on with that. There will be a lot of challenges. We can already today say what they will be. It's quite predictable process. It's not so unpredictable as one might imagine. If you have been involved in that, you could easily say, here you will definitely have the problem. The environmental issues will cost you so much thing. The farmers will have to implement these things before they will start getting the subsidies from the EU, and especially, of course, in our case, where we had a lot of problems and lots of debates before the accession, was where the private sector had to do a lots of investments, let's say, for the food safety issues. You really cannot produce food which is not safe, and you cannot put it on the EU market. And in my discussions sometimes with my Ukrainian friends, they have pointed out to me that, okay, if that is so complex, then we continue exporting to Turkey. Which is not a good idea, I don't think. It's food safety is always an issue, and it will become an issue also in Turkey. So you have to really undertake these reforms, and I'm really, I mean, it's difficult, it's war, I see these problems, but I also see the commitment, and that's what keeps me going, really. That's why I do it for Ukrainian friends. So I'm sure it's doable, but there will be obstacles. Now, coming to this issue of today's debates, mobilities, I thought that maybe I devote a couple of words on that, because mobility will be one of the issues of the accession. There will be lots of discussion on free movement of labor, and that has definitely problematic moments. And here again, I thought I might give you an example of my own country, which is quite relevant, I think. It's, of course, we're a very small country. That makes us a little bit specific, 1.4 million. But, of course, the free movement of labor before the accession, in the time to the run-up of the accession, was a major issue for Estonians. That was the issue because we were deprived of that as part of the Soviet Union. Nobody could travel anywhere. We couldn't even go to the border regions in Estonia, because that was 5 kilometers border region. I mean, it was forbidden for Estonia unless you lived in this area. So it was psychologically an important issue that you could really get this freedom of movement to other countries. And all of a sudden, then, of course, we got this political debate that the labor force from the new member states will of course destroy the labor situation and the employment situation in the member states. And especially problematic it seemed to be for our neighbors in Finland. And they were very much afraid, because we are very close nations. We have always been very close partners. We almost speak the same language. We can understand each other very well. The Finnish trade unions said all of a sudden that they made a study which said that the first year after the accession there will be 400,000 Estonians moving over to Finland. So you can imagine the whole labor force in Estonia is 800,000. 400,000 will move over to Finland, and this study had a huge repercussion in the Finnish society. I'm not critical, I'm just telling you what happened. And of course it put the Finnish government under very strong pressure to do something about that. And then of course it appeared that Germany had the same ideas about, the Austria had the same ideas about Poland and things like that. So we ended up in a transitional period for all the new member states, I think except Cyprus and Malta, who got the free access immediately. So, but the interesting thing is what happened next. And this is something we did not foresee immediately, was that step by step, of course, a lot of Estonians after the accession started moving over to Finland to work, and especially when the transitional period was finished. And in a few years, about 50,000 Estonians had left to work in Finland. It was not, of course, 400,000, but even 50,000 out of 800,000 is a high percentage. And these were not pensioners. These were young persons in the best years, and they took their children, of course, with them. So An estimate is that today we could have between 50,000, 100,000 Estonians living in Finland. Many of them are commuting, so it's difficult to assess because we are closely in proximity. And as soon as people put their children in kindergartens and schools, they hardly ever come back. So from the perspective of Estonian economy, we lost a lot of people, actually, as a part of the labor force. Lots of doctors, lots of medicals, veterinary people, not only to EU, but also to Norway and many other countries. So what I'm trying to give you is a perspective just reflecting the debates in the morning, that the mobility is an issue. I don't believe you can do very much about that, because I would hardly have imagined, that even if we had foreseen that so many people would like to, for different reasons, move away, but because now we have the reverse process. People are coming back for some years already, and it's very positive. That you could do very much about that. I mean, we could not have said to the Estonians that, no, we shall not let you go. And especially for the young people, for the students, for the scientists, it was lifetime opportunity. So I think what I'm trying to tell you is that that's a two-way process. We won a lot because as doctors, many of them have come back with a lot of improved know-how. They have invested in new cabinets, in new technology in Estonia as well. It took time, but in the beginning it looked out quite dramatic. And of course, Estonians, well, Finland was attractive because we could understand and speak the language. Otherwise, we couldn't go to Germany and France because very few Estonians would manage the language. Now, I'm trying to put on my head the hat of Ukrainians now, because that's one of my tasks today as well, is that when the war will be over and if there's Ukraine will really become the EU member state, I can see that there is a risk of labor moving out of country. And again, there have been, if I'm not mistaken, politicians in the country who have said that in that case, we bring from third countries labor force to Ukraine. Well, it's up to Ukraine, of course, to decide how to do about that. But I can see, and I'm trying to tell you, that these processes can be sometimes, they can get out of hand. But on the other hand, it's very difficult to manage them. You can motivate the people. You can perhaps improve the salaries or whatever. You can do quite a number of things, actually. But to do it with rules and regulations, it didn't work in our case in either way. I mean, the transition periods introduced by the EU for the labor force limitations didn't work at the end. I could find out some empirical studies for that reason. Of course, I've been to UK. UK was very positive about that, and then I happened to be in a village pub in Oxford, somewhere where the local pub owner was very disappointed. In the evening, he told me that in this small village nobody is from England. Everybody is from either from this one is from Poland, this one is from Lithuania, and somebody. Well, so you see my point. So that was my perhaps a little bit confusing presentation, but I tried to bring a different angle to today's debate. But I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. Theoretically, there should be now the second round of questions, but I think let's do something unorthodox here, since you've been so patient with us. And let's try and see whether there are some questions and comments which could be answered by our brilliant panelists. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Don't worry, I have my own questions prepared, but I'm sure your questions are better. So is there anyone who is still, with the right amount of energy who would like to ask a question? I understand, it takes time. Okay, no pressure there. So you're kind, simply you're providing some space for my questions. I really appreciate it. So I would like, there is a question? Oh, come. I knew it.
Thank you. Ivan Kazachenko, Center of Migration Research, University of Warsaw. My question is to Ambassador Bodnar. Your Excellency, We all know that government of Ukraine established the Ministry of National Unity. And it's a major step. It's like Vice Prime Minister is leading this. What's this going on? And how do you see the prospects of its development, and particularly the establishment of this unity hubs? Just would be interesting to see your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's really essential questions for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So the idea of this ministry is to communicate with Ukrainians abroad. Unity hubs, which should be created in the capitals, would be established to help Ukrainians both who are staying here and wouldn't like to leave the countries of today's residents, but also to help those who would like to turn back home. So without the human capital, you know, who will be living there, who will be reconstructing the country, and who will think about the future? It's still the big issue. So we should work together here, because the questions which you already raised about the competitiveness of Ukrainians here and on different markets, it is already happening. The war which started forced millions of Ukrainians to leave the country. I don't know, 1 million refugees established themselves in Poland, and three-fourths of them, or I mean 75%, are already working here. And sorry for being blunt, but also create some pressure inside the Polish society, which reflects to the elections and different other moods. So the story of our case with Poland is going on well. So we are in discussions of the Ministry of Interior and Administration. We are now in the process of creating the scheme, how it will look like, because we'll need to compose two ideas. One of these integration centers for migrants, which is the, I wouldn't say idea of Mr. Duszczyk, but he is the person responsible from the governmental side on running this issue, with our idea of unity hubs, and to fulfill both tasks. Because actually, originally it was created in such a mode that we need to help Ukrainians staying here and with the Ukrainians to turn back home. So we are already in the process of creating concepts, signing documents, and choosing the premises. So hopefully it's the final stage of our discussions. We also attract some international partners who are on our side, who could assist us from the financial point of view. From the terms of widening or spreading up these unity hubs, so we have already signed agreements in Germany with German government, Czech, France, and Spain. So we also believe that if the main office will be established here in Poland in Warsaw for Poland, then maybe in some cities we would have branches, which will also be assisting in the fulfilling of these duties for those Ukrainians who need it. But it is not only about turning back or let's say or staying here. It's about mostly about the helping and connecting Ukrainian with the motherland, and create the bridge for different solutions. So the government or the country couldn't force their citizens to do something under the pressure. It is not, it's not European dimension. It is the opportunity. And if the opportunities in Ukraine, I believe they will be created after the war will be over, then these centers or these hubs will be sufficient, will work accordingly, and bring results which will be both beneficial for the country of residence and for Ukraine as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see there is another question, right?
Thank you, Cesar Luszyński. I would also have a question towards for Ambassador Bodnar. How would you tackle upon the issue of decentralization in your country? I mean, delegating the competence in respect of governance, including the structural funds. Obviously, it's a task after war, not now. Thank you.
I would say honestly that the decentralization reform was the very good success story which we take from Poland. So the model of decentralization was made, I mean, this reform, I was the part of this story being Deputy Minister in Foreign Affairs before this reform was over. And it was very successful in the terms of defense. because the territorial defense have this part of capabilities being supported by the local authorities and regional administrations. And when the war started, a lot of veterans who already have combat experience, they immediately, let's say, formed the detachments which were financed by local government and administrations, but as well was subordinated to the Ministry of Defense. So it was one of the, let's say, visible part of this decentralization reform. The second story, it's about the resilience of the local authorities. Even if you look at today's front line and cities and towns which are functioning under the constant bomb shells and artillery shells, so they are surviving many thanks to their own budget capabilities, their own decision-making process. They are less dependable on the central budget and, let's say, the influence from outside. Despite, it still remains the political dimension of the story. There are still, let's say, political turmoils between the local authorities and central authorities. It still exists, but it's in a more proper way, which does not hurt the possibilities to function, even in the terms of war, by the local authorities. So another story is about how to look, what is the visibility for the future. So. I believe that the integration to the EU is one of the key elements of strengthening these local authorities, and cohesion policy plus strengthening their competitiveness in practical terms. Because one thing is to establish the frame or to give the possibility, but another is to establish an infrastructure and create the relevant persons. For example, if we had previously very small 2 or 3 villages joining this powiat-like governing structures, now it's different. This Hromada, which is more stronger, join more people and have more capabilities, and they need also the infrastructure for to provide their activities and to organize their work. So it was done very quickly, and the war here also facilitated because of the necessity to be more responsible for the challenges we have here in the country. I believe that this example of strong local authorities will be based on the best practices from the EU, and here we have also strong support from the Brussels, and I believe we could also continue to strengthen, also tackling the general problems like fighting corruption, establishing more favorable conditions, for example, for veterans, and meeting other challenges which are essential for Ukraine but maybe not so visible from the European perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will take now the liberty to ask my questions, and I will spare Mr. Ambassador because already... No, you will be spared this time. So more than one panelist emphasized that indeed enlargement policy is a huge success, right? So my question to Henryka Mościcka-Dendys is, since you started this motive, since it's such a success, why it's so hard to sell? There are so many people in Poland and in other member countries of EU who think that this is a problem and that's something we don't need, right? So this kind of fatigue phenomenon. So why it's so hard to sell it, right? Then to Jolanta Szymańska, right? You mentioned that, most countries claim that enlargement is a priority, but when it comes to actions, in fact, they are much more modest. Right? So my question is, and it is something also what Marta mentioned, so do we need a war to have all countries on board? And is a common enemy enough to have this enlargement happening, right? And then a question for Professor Delcour. You're absolutely right when you say that, in fact, when you think about attractiveness of EU, for the countries in South Caucasus, even Eastern Europe, if you think about the referendum about EU in Moldova, right? It's not a given anymore that EU is, a really an alternative or an option that all nations in this part of the world, they want to join, right? Because of the security issues, because they can know how it can end, right? So the question is, do you see it coming in the EU right now that we could come with an offer to those countries, which would be really about providing security as well? Not just, rule of law, democracy, modernization, but really something hard when it comes to security. And finally, to Ambassador Streimann, You said you believe that Ukraine can join EU. So my question is, since you're, with your all experience and taking part in EU negotiations, right? Do you see it happening? So Ukraine joining EU before the war ends, or is finding the solution to the war, finding a settlement to a war, a precondition for this to end with a success? So, please, who would like to start? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with why is enlargement so difficult to sell? I think Jolanta Szymańska partially answered that. We haven't taken the policy seriously enough. And fears are very easy to sell. When you remember, each and every discussion about enlargement was accompanied with a discussion about how dangerous the process is and how costly and how risky. I remember, just to recall an example from France, I recall a discussion about the famous Polish plumber. Many of you will remember, who was endangering the French labor market. And I remember also the Polish embassy and then printing posters with a very handsome young gentleman saying, I think in front of specific Polish monuments in Krakow and in Warsaw, saying, please come in big numbers, I stay here. Venez nombreux, je reste ici. It was quite funny, I think, but it was a very smart way of let's say, changing the context of a rather heavy discussion into something light and presenting it as an opportunity. So I think, to be very blunt and to be very short in my answer, I think we should really speak about the bright sides of enlargement. We speak too much about the fears and about the problems, of the challenges, and not really about the long-term benefits and long-term opportunities also for the net payers, because an important aspect of the enlargement discussion obviously are the financial aspects. And I think, 20 years after the Big Bang enlargement, we also much smarter in addressing the challenges, and we smarter to understand where our priorities and main interests lie. They haven't changed much, but we look at them from a completely different aspect. And many speakers said enlargement nowadays is perceived mainly via the security lens, and rightly so, because for Europe it's also the opportunity to enlarge the area of stability and security, and bring under one umbrella those who are knocking on our doors and might be potentially subject also to pressure from other aspects. So we should probably start to speak about enlargement in a different way.
Thank you.
This year I was participating in a trainingship for all the candidate countries and Poland because of presidency about enlargement. And I heard really good sentence that when it comes to enlargement, perfect is the enemy of good. And I really agree, because from my colleagues from Western Balkans, I could hear very often, how can you expect such a restrict anti-corruption measure if you have Hungary and Bulgaria on board inside the European Union with corruption problems? How can you expect and how can you predict if in a longer run some rule of law issue will not appear in member states, So you cannot expect more from candidate countries than you perform inside the European Union. And somehow I have a feeling that we expect better standards and higher standards from the candidate countries, what make them frustrated. And we should think also about ourselves. So it was maybe not answering directly to the question, but I just wanted to mention it, that we cannot be so super prepared to predictions, all the development in the next 20, 30 years, as we can see even here in Poland, how democratic countries can be, how to say it, well, surprising, how the process can surprise us. And I think in Germany, in France, they can really look at themselves and try to reflect on themselves also. So this is one point. And the second, the war. I think that it's not only the war that we are facing a lot of many other problems. We are facing not only one war in our neighborhood, we have at least 2 very close wars in our neighborhood. Moreover, we have completely changing neighborhood in terms of foreign influences now. I mean, United States are cutting humanitarian aid, and new actors are coming to our neighborhood. We can lose this neighborhood. We can lose our, I'm not even say soft power, but our general influence in the neighborhood. You mentioned Armenia, but Armenia it's a very positive element of pro-European spirit, but we have the other spirits going in the other way. So we should think about it, that to keep European Union attractive, we should be more proactive. So I'm not sure if this war is enough, frankly speaking, because I hope somehow that as European Union is developing from crisis to crisis, so having so many crises at the same time now, we will speed up all the processes. But frankly speaking, I know that with time that is running, we are also losing the spirit a little bit. And we are not so brave always in taking actions. But I still think that we should keep our finger crossed for the process.
Keep my fingers crossed, and now we have 6 minutes, so let's like this 2 minutes per Professor Delcour and Ambassador Streimann, and then 1 minute for me. That's okay.
It's my turn now, yeah?
Yes.
Please, go ahead.
About security and the EU's security offer, well, you know that the EU's traditional approach to security is quite specific, because in the EU's approach, security cannot be divided from democracy, from the rule of law, and from good governance. Unfortunately, some other actors in the region do not share this view, and they have a much harder vision of security. And I see the EU moving towards a much broader offer and much, a realistic offer of security. But the EU is a very slow machine, and so this is a very slow move that you can see in the Eastern neighborhood with instruments such as the European Peace Facility, new missions, and other recent defense instruments. Perhaps another point about enlargement fatigue. I actually show to my students during courses that a picture of the Polish young man to explain that, well, no one should be afraid about enlargement. And in my view, it's not only about fear, it's also about ignorance. Fear is based on ignorance. Surveys have recently been conducted in France about support to enlargement, and they show a high degree of correlation between, for instance, knowledge of or ties with Ukraine and support to enlargement So this is a very important aspect that should be kept in mind by EU governments and by the EU itself, I think. Information and awareness.
Thank you. Yes.
You asked a very tricky question from me. If I remember correctly, does Ukraine join the EU before the war ends? To answer that question, we should really try to extrapolate when the war ends. And, well, to be frank, I cannot answer this question in this way, but I give you two perspectives. And probably my good Cypriot friends don't like it, but Cyprus is a divided country. And it's still in the EU and very successful and prosperous member country. Yes, even if part of a country, well, I'm not saying it's Ukraine or anybody, are occupied, we can find solutions, technical adaptations, whatever, so that everybody will be happy, at least as happy we can be in such a situation. So I do not see it as a prevention for EU membership as such. Second perspective, and sometimes we need to think out of frames, and in a small country like mine, we have to do that very often, sometimes from the morning to the evening, to stay in competition. Think if there would be an aggression against the member country, shall we kick them out of the union? No, of course not. So we try to put it, we have to put these things in a perspective. So I really don't think, even if Ukraine is very much hampered by the ongoing war. I know that men are on the front, women have to work in the ministries. It's very difficult. I really admire what the people are doing. But in my opinion, it's not an argument against the accession. Secondly, perhaps if you allow me, on this, how to explain things to the public. Because Estonia had the lowest public support for the accession among all the candidate countries. I think perhaps 37% were only supportive of accession when we started accession negotiations. And when we finished, we had a referendum which was a majority in favor. We measured the public opinion during the whole course of negotiations. Everybody was absolutely unpopular as usual, whether the government, the parliament, whatever. The negotiating team was always positively, because we were frank. We spoke about the things as they were standing. We never made secrets about problems. And of course, you need a special campaign, perhaps in the run-up to the referendum, and you can do a lot of tricks, which everybody does usually. But we also finance the opposition. We finance both sides of the campaign, and it's very important. I think our French colleagues have a saying: "Si bien il connaît ses gens." You have to know your people. People are different. They have different problems, and they have different fears and different expectations. In Estonia, in most seminars, people ask me, will the EU improve our traffic culture? And that is one of the few things which didn't happen, actually. And I'm very sorry about that. But
Okay.
all the rest positive things came. So
All right.
that's how it is.
Let's end on this positive.
Yeah.
Allow me a minute and a half more, please. Just that. I had this beautiful conclusion now, but to just make it in like 40 seconds, and then something else will come out at the end. So we just heard about the great story of success we should be proud of, right? We know that the Poland is on board. We just have to make Hungarians to join us, right? And the things should get smoother. Of course, we should also understand, that the road is bumpy. We have to keep our societies informed. We have to raise their awareness and knowledge about the neighborhood and vice versa, right? And we cannot anymore take EU attractiveness for granted, right? Because there are alternatives also in terms of geopolitical alternatives, especially in the Western Balkans. And that the war which happened, which is a great tragedy, right, a completely senseless one, might be turned to an opportunity, right? And it's on us not to miss this opportunity, because we will end up as the moderator of one of the panel of Lancets in a kind of melancholic mood, right? That we failed when we could have acted, right? And finishing here, I would like to turn to Mr. Ambassador of Ukraine. And on behalf of organizers, and I'm sure many of people sitting here, we would like to express our gratitude to the Ukrainian nation, which was mentioned as an agent, a very important one during this panel, for the bravery, for the resilience, for fighting really for our future and for our values. Slava Ukraini!
Couldn't be possible without your support.
You had to find, we don't need the right, we need the weapons, right? Thank you, and please enjoy the dinner.